The police say they're investigating links to right-wing extremism and the mental health of the man suspected of killing the MP Jo Cox. The BBC learns Nazi regalia was found at the home of Tom Maher, the 52-year-old only suspect. West Yorkshire police say the attack was a targeted one, and they're now looking into possible links with the far right.
We are also aware of the inference within the media of the suspect being linked to right-wing extremism, which again is a priority line of inquiry.
Putting political differences aside, the Prime Minister and the Labour leader visit Jo Cox's constituency to pay tribute.
Parliament has lost one of its most passionate and brilliant campaigners, someone who epitomised the fact that politics is about serving others.
Campaigning for the referendum has been suspended, and there's been a vigil for Jo Cox at Westminster tonight. Also on the programme, Russia won't be heading for Rio. It's banned from competing at the Olympics because of doping allegations. The 94-year-old former guard at Auschwitz, jailed for being an accessory to the murder of 170,000 people. And Tim Peake is scheduled to fall back to Earth tomorrow. It could be his most testing challenge yet.
Here in the south, breathless, thousands of patients lose out as a new cystic fibrosis drug will not be given out by the NHS. And remembering Joe, here, a vigil in the south to support the family whose special links to Reading.
Good evening. West Yorkshire police say they're investigating links to right-wing extremism and the mental health of the man suspected of killing the MP Jo Cox yesterday in Birstall. The BBC understands police have found Nazi regalia, including Nazi literature, in his home. Tom Maher, who's 52 and from Birstall, is in police custody. The police have also revealed a 77-year-old man intervened bravely, in their words, to help the MP during the attack. He suffered a serious injury to his abdomen and remains in hospital. Daniel Sanford is in Birstall for us this evening. Daniel, more details are now beginning to emerge about the suspect this evening.
Yes, Fiona, just over 30 hours into this investigation, the direction of the police inquiry is now becoming clear. Detectives suspect they're dealing with a political killing with a far-right ideology behind it and possible mental health problems in the background. But although they have only one suspect, no charges have been brought. Bright, funny, straightforward, Jo Cox MP. A rising star of the new generation of British politicians, brutally killed in what police called today a targeted attack with an unlawfully held firearm.
Whilst en route to the library where she had a scheduled constituency meeting, she was attacked and sustained serious injuries from both a firearm and a knife. And despite assistance from passers-by, the ambulance service and police officers who were quickly on the scene, she sadly died of her injuries. During the course of the incident, a 77-year-old man bravely intervened to assist Jo, and in doing so sustained a serious injury to his abdomen. And although he's now stable, he remains in hospital.
And this is still the only suspect in the murder, in custody but not charged, known to his family as Tom Maher, to his neighbours as Tommy Maher. These the receipts uncovered by an American civil rights group, which appear to show that Thomas Maher had links with the National Alliance, a US neo-Nazi group. One, dated 1999, suggests he bought a book on explosives, and the Improvised Munitions Handbook, which includes instructions on how to make a homemade gun. He also ordered a book given to Nazi Party recruits in Hitler's Germany, and he subscribed to extreme right-wing magazines too for several years. But none of this paper trail is recent. At Tom Maher's house, half a mile from the murder scene, detectives found Nazi regalia, books and literature. Possible far-right extremism is now a priority line in this inquiry. But his neighbours paint a completely different picture of a quiet man, a keen gardener, who even taught English to newly arrived immigrants. He was arrested yesterday, and police say they're investigating suggestions that he might have had mental health problems. But although neighbours knew he had epilepsy, they were unaware of anything like depression or schizophrenia.
I was a nurse for 40 years, and I'm sure I would have picked up on something. There was never any inclination that he, I mean, I know he was alone, and that in itself can be depressing, but there was never indication that he was mentally ill.
Nobody that we've spoken to that knew Tom Mair well had any idea about his political views. The opinions he had, he kept very much to himself and behind closed doors. His mother lives in a bungalow in nearby Batley. She was too upset to talk to the media, but her good friend and neighbour, Rosemary Sermon, said he'd been a good son who helped with shopping and cleaning, and that his mum was devastated by what had happened.
The children that's been left behind without a mum, we're both heartbroken and we're so sorry. We can't understand why. I know it's never going to go away, and we'll have to live with this each day of our lives.
Because of the identity of the murder victim and the possible far-right motive, this is being seen as potentially a political crime. So West Yorkshire Police detectives are being helped in this investigation by the North East Counter-Terrorism Unit. Detectives recovered from the scene a large hunting or combat knife and a gun with a barrel which had been deliberately shortened. Of course, detectives only have a limited time to hold their suspect, so it's most likely he'll be charged or released either tonight or sometime over the weekend. Fiona.
Daniel Sanford, thank you. The Prime Minister and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, have visited the West Yorkshire village of Birstall together to pay their respects to Jo Cox. They laid flowers at a monument near where she was attacked. David Cameron said her values of service, community and tolerance should be the focus of everybody's work. Jeremy Corbyn called her death an act of hatred. Parliament will be recalled on Monday for MPs to pay tributes to their colleague. Our special correspondent, Ed Thomas, reports from Birstall.
In Birstall, a realisation of what has been taken. With every hour, more flowers for Jo Cox. Messages from those she never met. The MPs she worked alongside. And the words of the people she helped.
She meant everything. She were approachable, she were kind.
She must have said to her kids, you know, see you tonight, you know, what we're having for tea, mummy, and it's just such an inhumane act.
And today, politics were put to one side, campaigns on hold. David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn, united in their respect for a local MP.
Parliament has lost one of its most passionate and brilliant campaigners, someone who epitomised the fact that politics is about serving others.
Jo was an exceptional, wonderful, very talented woman, taken from us in her early 40s when she had so much to give.
How do you feel right now?
I'm elated, but I'm humbled.
Friends talk of that smile.
But they're trusting me to be your next Member of Parliament.
A sense of fun and a speaker from the heart.
I'm proud that I was made in Yorkshire, and I'm proud of the things that we make in Yorkshire, and Britain should be proud of that too. I look forward to representing the great people of Batley and Spen here over the next 5 years.
And what's left behind? Birstall, a town for now patrolled by armed officers. As detectives speak to this man, Thomas Mair, arrested on this street 24 hours ago. Minutes earlier, Jo Cox had been shot and stabbed.
And he had to be stopped.
Darren Playford was there. He rang 999.
People stood all round, it were just chaos, people screaming, and he was just plunging this knife into her continuously.
Now he cannot forget. And when you rang the police, what did you say to them?
I just told them to, well, basically get here as quick as you can and bring the firearms team, ambulance, everything. It just, and that poor lass, now she suffered yesterday.
In just a few minutes, so many lives were changed here.
Here was somebody who believed in things.
Kath Pinnock was meant to see Jo at 2 p.m. yesterday.
and we had arranged to meet here, as we'd done the previous week.
She was killed an hour before.
It didn't matter whether you were a single parent who wanted support or you were a refugee in Syria.
And how will you remember her?
As somebody who stood up for what she believed in, but did it with a smile.
And that was Jo Cox, a wife, mother and passionate campaigner. Thomas, BBC News, Birstall.
The fact that Jo Cox was killed on her way to meet constituents has put the issue of MPs' security under close scrutiny. Some politicians have chosen to cancel their constituency surgeries today, and the Labour MP, Neil Coyle, told the BBC that MPs have been warned of copycat-style attacks. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, looks at how yesterday's killing may affect the relationship between the public and their politicians.
Visible security at one MP's constituency office today. Very visible. People here, Hyde near Manchester, weren't getting near their MP without being checked.
I want to make sure my staff feel safe because that's very important to me. I also want to make sure that people coming to see me feel safe. So we're going to have a little bit more of a security presence than usual. I think people will understand the need for that.
The armed police, the cameras everywhere. Westminster's been on guard against terrorism for years, but no one can be 100% safe when they're away from here, and few expect to be, including one MP stabbed in his constituency 6 years ago.
The police did say to me, would you like a metal arch, a metal detector on the way into the surgery? But the problem with that would be that it would make going to see your MP a pretty unpleasant experience.
In Parliament Square, proof that Jo Cox's death touched many, the marks of respect piling up. Few MPs get much respect day to day. Abuse and even fear of violence, a fact of life for many of them. Keeping a safe distance isn't an option.
We don't sit behind glass screens when we speak to our constituents. We don't, except for a handful of ministers, we don't go round in armoured cars. We walk around amongst our constituents because we've got to do that in order to be able to listen to them, to hear what they've got to say.
You can't legislate against terrible acts. You can take all necessary precautions against them, but every MP is not going to end up with their own security guards, and nor do we wish for that.
Jo Cox will be remembered as a woman who gave politics a good name. Others here do the same every day, and maybe, just maybe, politicians would feel at least a little safer if more people recognised that. MPs have been told they're entitled to help making their homes safe, but no amount of security can guarantee their safety in an open democracy like Britain, where people live and mix freely with the ones they elect. Cynicism about politics has become rife in the media, among the public, and the brutal personal campaigning we've seen in this referendum is not likely to change that. 2 minutes silence in Parliament Square tonight. Will political debate become more respectful after this? Yes, for a time, but will politics and the view we take of politics rise to a new and higher level for good? That seems far less likely. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, who's at Westminster for us this evening. Laura, MPs are clearly shocked by yesterday's events. They have lined up to pay tribute to Jo Cox, and now the referendum campaign has been suspended.
That's right, Fiona. And just 36 hours ago, we were in the crescendo of a noisy, vicious, really blistering campaign about our place in the world. And now Parliament's being recalled, those campaigns are on hold. And there's been a total change in the political mood. And you know, politics is always a tough business. That is not going to change because of these awful events. But given what's happened, given how party leaders have come together out of respect for Jo Cox today, it's hard tonight to imagine them returning immediately to the kind of very confrontational, very personal campaigning that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. So with just 3 full days of campaigning to go now before we all make our decision, you can imagine that the closing moments of the referendum campaigns might be calmer in tone, if not kinder. But you know, Fiona, in politics, it's not just the atmosphere that matters, but in any campaign, it's the timing, the pace, and the momentum too. And this pause that has been brought about for the most awful of reasons, well, that pause could matter too.
Laura Koonsberg at Westminster, thank you. Russian athletes won't be able to compete at this summer's Olympics after the International Athletics Federation said it will maintain its ban following widespread doping allegations. The ban was imposed in November after the World Anti-Doping Agency found evidence of state-sponsored cheating. But some individual Russian competitors could still take part in Rio if the International Olympic Association makes a special dispensation. Here's our sports correspondent, Richard Conway.
The Rio Olympic Games will begin in just a few weeks' time, but any hope that Russian athletes held of competing in Brazil were today dealt a major blow. Today, Lord Coe upheld that suspension after Russia failed to comply with the demands made of it. In theory, it rules Russian athletes out of this summer's Olympics.
Although good progress has been made, the IAAF Council was unanimous that RUSAF had not met the reinstatement conditions and that Russian athletes could not credibly return to international competition without undermining the confidence of their competitors and the public.
Last year, an independent commission uncovered state-sponsored collusion throughout the sport, and this week a report from the World Anti-Doping Agency confirmed that not enough has changed. Many believe that was a critical factor for today's vote, but Russia's president believes the ban is unfair.
The team cannot be held responsible for offences committed by individual athletes, and I think this is absolutely natural and the right approach.
Although this was a decision by the entire IAAF Council, its president, Lord Coe, needed a show of strength, and that's because he's under scrutiny over what he knew and when about the Russian doping cover-up. BBC's Panorama alleged he received an email which outlined allegations concerning Russia 4 months before the doping scandal became public knowledge. Lord Coe says he forwarded the email to the IAAF's Ethics Committee without opening the email attachment. It's also claimed he received advice over his IAAF election campaign from an official now under criminal investigation.
It is the very nature of a campaign that advice is given whether it is sought or not. Some of it is useful, some of it less so.
The stakes are incredibly high. Russian pole vaulter Yelena Isinbayeva says she's now considering legal action. But the IAAF say that athletes that can prove they were outside the Russian testing system and are clean may be able to compete under a neutral flag. The International Olympic Committee will also meet next week, with some senior officials believed to be against any form of collective punishment. Richard Conway, BBC News, Vienna.
The Iraqi government is claiming it's recaptured the city of Fallujah from so-called Islamic State. The city is 30 miles from the capital, Baghdad, and has been held by IS longer than any other city in Iraq. The UN says up to 50,000 civilians are trapped there. The battle to take the city has been raging for nearly a month. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale sent this report as troops advanced on IS positions.
More than 3 weeks since the assault on Fallujah began, and so-called Islamic State is now losing ground. The fighting's reached the city itself. We joined the Iraqi army's quick reaction force as they advanced, still meeting stiff resistance.
Tank has just moved forward and just fired a shell. Islamic State positions are just behind us and just to the side of us. They are moving forward very, very slowly because this ground is littered with IEDs.
Their commander, General Abbas, is using everything at his disposal.
Do you have any update? Do you have any update about the enemy movement west?
Here, talking directly to coalition warplanes above. They release their bombs when they get a rare glimpse of the enemy, who the Iraqis call Daesh. But tens of thousands of civilians, too, are trapped in the city.
How close are Daesh to us now?
200 to 500 meters, that's all.
That's all?
Yeah.
You don't feel in danger here?
No.
Do you think you can defeat Daesh in Fallujah?
Certainly sure, 100%.
Fallujah was the first city in Iraq captured by IS. They've had 2 years to dig in. For some, this will be their own Armageddon. And the Iraqi security forces are taking casualties. The enemy's strength is thought to be in the hundreds. But the US says this drone footage shows some have been throwing away their equipment and trying to escape.
What we're already seeing is the enemy's morale is starting to break. We've got video of them throwing their weapons down with all their kit and running, burning it while they're running. I expect there will be a contingent there, some foreign fighters in there. They'll want to stay and fight until it's over.
The Iraqi government's already claiming victory, with their forces tearing down the Islamic State flag. But there is still resistance, and much of the city's been left in ruins. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Fallujah.
Football, and UEFA has launched an investigation into crowd disruption at this evening's Euro 2016 game between the Czech Republic and Croatia. Both flares and fireworks were thrown onto the pitch from the Croatian end of the ground with just minutes remaining in the match. They only narrowly avoided hitting both players and stewards. One section of the crowd were involved in scuffles. After a brief suspension, the game resumed and the Czech Republic scored a late equaliser. A 94-year-old former guard at the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz has been sentenced to 5 years in jail. A court in Germany found Reinhold Hanning guilty of being an accessory to the murder of at least 170,000 people. He said he knew what was going on at the camp, but did not act to stop it. Our correspondent Jenny Hill reports.
Germany is facing its past. Reinhold Hanning ran a dairy shop until he retired, but before that, he was an SS guard at Auschwitz. There's no evidence he killed anyone, but the court ruled he was part of the Nazi machine, which did. More than 1 million people were systematically murdered at the death camp. Perhaps just 4 people here today truly understand the significance of the verdict. They endured, survived Auschwitz. Today they saw Mr. Hanning sentenced to 5 years in prison. And for Leon Schwarzbaum, it's enough.
Can you forgive Mr. Hanning for his part in what happened?
I can't forgive it. We are both 95 years old, and he should tell the truth of Auschwitz.
The truth is well documented, and the names of wartime Nazis are here, in files, records, reports. Those who ordered the atrocities are long dead, but Germany is now pursuing those who obeyed them.
I think it's important for the society in Germany and abroad to understand nowadays what has happened in the concentration camps, how it was organized and who was responsible, not only the higher ranks but also the lower ranks who were necessary in order that the machinery could function.
This trial was about more than establishing one man's guilt. In the words of the judge, it was something we can do to give the victims of the Holocaust at least a semblance of justice. And it was an opportunity for this country to re-examine its darkest hour, perhaps for the last time. There are so few wartime Nazis still alive, and Reinhold Hanning is appealing his sentence. It's possible he'll never serve his time. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Detmold.
This time tomorrow, Tim Peake will have landed back on Earth. During his 6 months on board the International Space Station, he conducted more than 250 experiments, carried out a spacewalk and ran a marathon. But as our science editor David Shukman reports, his final challenge is to return home safely. A journey one former astronaut likened to going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, but with the barrel on fire.
Peake floating through the Destiny laboratory here.
After an uncertain start, Tim Peake soon adapted to life in space, and now after 6 months, it's time to come home. With astounding views down below, he took every chance to get to a window, but mainly he's been busy with research, right up to the final day. When Tim Peake returns to Earth tomorrow, this is the vast rolling terrain that he'll land in. The Russians have always brought people back from space to this area because it's so remote and so empty. For decades now, the process has been very reliable, but it is dramatic. It begins with a final view of Earth. 3 astronauts bunched inside a Soyuz capsule. The craft hurtles down through the atmosphere. Flames shoot past the window. The heat shield reaches 1600 degrees. And Britain's first astronaut, Helen Sharman, remembers the first feeling of weight.
My chest was pushing down on top of my lungs, so actually breathing became a little bit more arduous. You really have to sort of force yourself to breathe in. Breathing out is really easy. Tim won't have felt weight for 6 months, you know, so this is going to, suddenly he's going to start to feel these kind of, he'll feel weights, he'll feel like he's being pushed into his seat. He can actually feel his back against the back of his seat kind of thing. That'll feel weird.
No one knows exactly where the spacecraft will land. This animation from the Russian Space Agency shows how planes and helicopters keep watch. A giant parachute then opens. It slows the capsule, but sends it into a violent swing. So half a year of flying over Earth will come to an end with quite a bump. It's now Tim's last night on board, and tomorrow he'll descend through the skies of Central Asia. David Shukman, BBC News in Kazakhstan.
Back to our main story in the killing of the MP Jo Cox in Birstall. With campaigning ahead of next Thursday's referendum suspended until Sunday at least, David Cameron, visiting the Yorkshire town today, issued a plea for tolerance in British political life. Many MPs have been expressing concern about the level and tone of political debate in Britain. Our Home Editor, Mark Easton, has this assessment of the political mood.
It wasn't only an attack on a much-respected MP. It was an attack on our democratic values. That was the message from the political leaders standing shoulder to shoulder in the Yorkshire village where Jo Cox was killed. We must drive hatred, division and intolerance out of our politics, the Prime Minister said.
If we truly want to honour Jo, then what we should do is recognise that her values, service, community, tolerance, the values she lived by and worked by, those are the values that we need to redouble in our national life in the months and in the years to come.
We don't know what motivated Jo Cox's killer. But her brutal death has focused attention on the way our politics is conducted, how politicians behave and how voters view them, particularly amid the passion of the current EU referendum campaign.
I think as a sort of tribute to Jo, to soften the language, to be less aggressive. But for all of us, I think in that, you know, going up to next Thursday's referendum, let's all be nicer to each other.
The Prime Minister has long argued the right way to counter the threat from extremism is to focus on fundamental British values. At the local grammar school which Jo Cox attended, these are ideas now embedded in the curriculum.
Schools across England, including this one, must now promote respect for public institutions, the rule of law, democracy and other cultures.
Jo was head girl here. At this morning's assembly, the head teacher spoke of the inspiration she's been to the school.
She was clearly driven to do what's right, stand up for those who weren't in the best position to stand up for themselves, to be a voice for the powerless, and to serve the community that had elected her.
The tragic story of Jo.
I met pupils who knew Jo and have been reflecting on the political backdrop.
She showed what a politician should be like, I think, in my opinion. There's too many people accusing other people of lying, people exaggerating or in some cases fabricating statistics.
I think our politicians need to realise that we don't want the spin, we don't want the mudslinging, we don't want the personal attacks, we want to look at the issues, and that's how you'll engage people.
Trust in politicians is as low as it's ever been, the so-called establishment in the Westminster bubble routinely derided. But in paying tribute to Jo Cox today, our political leaders are also paying respect to the British values she embodied. Mark Easton, BBC News, Birstall.
And that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good weekend.